and friends have pushed those chairs together. That's quite all right if you're comfortable with that, but because we did space the chairs out, if you choose so, there are other chairs. You can remove your mask at this time if you would like to. Tonight we really have two opportunities for the board to hear public comment. The first hour, approximately an hour, is for a list of identified speakers. The second hour is public comment. That public comment will be for 3 minutes. At the 30-second mark, I will let you know that you got 30 seconds to go. For those timing, what I will try to do is allow people to try to finish a thought or a sentence. So if somebody goes to 3 minutes, 15, 25 seconds, we're not going to try to shut them down right there, but we would ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. If you get up and go to the restroom, we'd ask you to put your mask on as you will be walking past people that would like for you to have a mask on. So I think our board president has a comment, and then we will begin, and Holly will introduce our speakers.
So I said the same thing at last night's meeting, and I'll start the same way tonight. There has been no proposed curriculum change. We're just in an information gathering stage. No specific curriculum has been proposed for our students, and we're just gathering information, and then this committee will move on from there.
The first speaker this evening is Reverend Mike Riggins. The Reverend Mike Riggins pastors the Central Presbyterian Church of Terre Haute. He and his wife Linda are the parents of 2 and grandparents of 1, plus another expected in the fall.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. There is no such thing as the Christian sex ed curriculum. On this, as on many issues, Christians disagree in good faith. In fact, members of the church I serve hold different opinions on what curriculum the Vigo County School Corporation ought to use. I need therefore to say at the very outset that the thoughts I present tonight are my own. I do not speak for my whole congregation. I find myself in the odd position of asking you not to use a curriculum advocated for by certain segments of the Christian community. My concern is that it does not contain elements it needs in order to do its job properly. The CPR curriculum does not tell the whole truth about human sexuality, and it does not provide an equal welcome for all. In my opinion, all curricula need to fulfill the core values of the VCSC, and in my opinion, those core values ought to be: 1, giving students the best, most complete information available in every academic area, and 2, providing environments that are conducive to learning and safe for all students, no matter what their skin color, economic status, sexual identity, and etc. The teachings and actions of Jesus are a primary source of the values of our community and of our schools, and I'm glad for that. I want that to be the case. But if Jesus spoke directly to sex ed, the Gospels are remarkably silent on the topic. For guidance on what Jesus would do, we must therefore look to the great themes of his teachings and ask, what do these themes have to say to the question of which sex ed curriculum to use? First, Jesus insisted that people should know the whole truth. When confronted with those, often community leaders, who tried to keep people ignorant in order to maximize their own power, Jesus opposed them with every fiber of his being. When one group of religious leaders insisted that people must blindly obey them and not the Spirit of the Lord, Jesus called them whitewashed tombs. beautiful to look at,
30 seconds.
but death inside. I'm sorry, I was told that I had more time than that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong session. You do that. You keep going, sorry.
Okay. Jesus called these folks whitewashed tombs, beautiful to look at, but death on the inside. Any sex ed curriculum chosen should contain all the information children and youth need. It should tell the whole truth. It should not restrict access to facts about the human body, which God created and called good. It should inform the students, always in age-appropriate ways, of every medical and scientific resource available to them. Jesus had no use for those who tried to restrict the flow of information people needed in order to live their lives with freedom and joy. Neither should we. And Jesus often went out of his way to demonstrate his love for outcasts. Whether lepers, a despised Roman army officer, or a Samaritan woman who'd had numerous sexual partners, he physically touched them, he listened to them, he loved them. So should we. But the CPR curriculum is weak on welcome. With this exclusive emphasis on abstinence, it sends a message of disapproval to those students who are already sexually active. Now, make no mistake, I advocate for abstinence in sexual activity outside of marriage. By the grace of God, my own wife and I remained abstinent throughout our 5.5-year courtship. We told our children that we wanted them to do the same. Abstinence is the safest choice for our children. But from the statistics, we know that many of them have already chosen otherwise. We need a curriculum that includes them, or they will not listen to anything else we have to say, or that it tries to teach. The CPR curriculum is also weak on a related topic near and dear to me. As a husband, father of a daughter, and a pastor, I advocate that all women be respected. When the Me Too movement arose, I asked my daughter whether she had ever been sexually harassed. She answered, "I've never had a physical incident, but verbal? Probably every week of my life since I turned 13. The sex ed curriculum we choose absolutely must address sexual harassment more forthrightly. It must teach all our children to respect and protect one another. It must teach proper boundaries. It must be realistic about the world in which we live. And we must address the fact that human sexuality expresses itself across a wide spectrum. I know the Bible has some highly critical things to say about gays and lesbians. But in my branch of the Christian tree, we do not simply take the Bible literally. Through prayer and study, we search the Word of God for the Word God wants to teach us within the words of Scripture. And in fact, these days, nobody takes every word of the Bible at face value. We all interpret it. Were it otherwise, we would see women self-quarantining after every menstrual cycle, as it requires in the book of Leviticus. My interpretation of Scripture tells me that Jesus loves all people, and that he commands all people to love all people. If we truly want to use a sex ed curriculum in line with his teaching, it needs to do a much better job of making space for the LGBTQ community. We can do this without adopting the agenda of their advocacy groups, because, for the record, I disagree with many of their policy positions. But when a gay young person enters the classroom for sex ed in Vigo County, for the love of God, We ought to provide a curriculum that welcomes him or her as well as it does the straight students. I urge this board to do better. Find a sex ed curriculum that contains the best, most current, most complete, scientifically based information, and find one that welcomes all the students without exception. I honestly believe this is a legitimate way to square it with Christian teaching, and I fervently believe it is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Melissa K. McCollister, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Work, College of Health and Human Services, Indiana State University. Dr. McCollister teaches social work students, including VCSC graduates, who are advocating for LGBTQ inclusion in the sexual health education curriculum.
Hello. Thank you all for taking the time to hear from those of us in the community that are concerned about the health and well-being of all youth, not just some. I'm here to advocate that LGBTQ youth are relevant human beings and contributing members of society. They deserve to be supported and recognized by our public school system, and most of all, educated. I stand before you tonight to speak on behalf of all youth in the following concerns: the lack of inclusiveness of sex ed curriculum, the role of the school board, the mission of the Vigo County School Corporation, the definition of sexuality, healthy relationships, the harmful result of discrimination, and lastly, the importance of a personal narrative of students that have been harmed by the current sex ed curriculum. According to the Trevor Project, approximately 10.5% of youth ages 13 to 18 identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. There are over 4,000 students in the Vigo County School Corporation in grades 9 through 12 that are 13 to 18. That equates to potentially over 400 students in the school system that could be identified as LGBT. In a recent national study by the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, less than 1 in 10 LGBTQ+ students said they received sex ed that was inclusive of their identities. As reported on the Vigo County School Corporation website, our public schools belong to the people. We elect the school board to represent them. We are ultimate governors of public education, and the board is directly accountable to the citizens of Vigo County. As a citizen of Vigo County, it is my job, and everyone's job, to hold all of ourselves accountable for maintaining interest in, concern for, and constructive criticism of the school corp, to provide clear, concise, and sound evidence-based information to all of our students. I'm here tonight as a resident of Vigo County and as a social work educator with over 17 years of experience, starting in the criminal justice system, teaching self-esteem and emotion regulation for youth. And in our public school system, I have spent over a decade in child welfare, started the first LGBTQ youth program in my community, and during that time, when I coordinated this program, I lived in Vigo County School Corporation. I've spent the last year listening to LGBTQ+ community individuals here in Terre Haute. And I think at a previous school board meeting, we discussed the Human Rights Campaign Municipality Index that did a study in 2019, 2016, and then again in 2019, that listed Terre Haute at a 45 out of 100 at a score of LGBTQ inclusivity. This leads to discrimination. Another point is sexuality, and there is a misconception about what sexuality is. Just looking up the definition, it says, sexuality is not about who you have sex with or about how often you have it. Sexuality is about your sexual feelings, your thoughts, your attraction, and behaviors towards others. You can find others physically, sexually, or emotionally attractive, and all those things are part of your sexuality. In the LGBT community, there are a list of different sexuality terms and fluidity. For example, a demisexual, an individual that is attracted based on emotion. A pansexual, which is attracted to an individual that, regardless of gender or sexuality. If a student is, in their adolescence and they're coming out with their identity and they have no idea how to define what is going on with them, what does that lead to? I'm a researcher, right? If you can't define something, then this becomes extremely confusing to solve, to protect, to fix, right? Healthy relationships. There is no mention on how to build healthy relationships within the LGBTQ plus community and how sexuality is more than just intercourse between a man and a woman. When we talk about asexuality, there are individuals within the LGBTQ plus community that have no desire to have sex with another individual. What happens to those youth that are confused and not understanding that, oh, there is a term for asexuality? There are complicating and internally feeling shame and guilt because no one in their sex ed curriculum was discussing with them gender identity and expression. When we look at what has just happened in the U.S. Supreme Court decision on homosexuality and transgendered individuals being covered in anti-discrimination laws, even with this law and policy change, can we stop discrimination from happening in our systems? We can't. The only way we can do that is if every single individual person takes the responsibility on their own and says, this is not going to happen, right? We all have a responsibility to do our own internal work, to educate ourselves, because that's our job. We're educators. We are a servant to the public, and that means to everybody. When we look at the school climate survey that GLSEN put out in 2015, here's just some of the statistics that can represent discrimination in the school systems. More than 3 times as likely to have missed school in the past month as those who had not, 43% to 12.3% LGBT students have reported. Lower GPAs than their peers, lower self-esteem and school belonging, and higher levels of depression. 32% report that they did not plan to finish high school. And they indicated that they were considering dropping out. And so that leads me to my final point, and my final point is about the personal narrative. I could give you statistics all day, right? But what is going to be so impactful about this issue is hearing from individuals and their lived experience. So I'm going to just refer to a few people just to tell you a few things about what they've experienced.
My name is Martina Holt, and I'm a graduate of 2005 Terre Haute North High School. So I am familiar with the current curriculum. I also know how it made me feel. I internalized my own homophobia, I bore shame and guilt, and I felt as if I had less worth than my peers. As a parent of 3 young children currently in the Vigo County School Corporation, who will eventually be under this curriculum that you choose, my question to you is this: how will you teach my children to feel about me? How will you teach my children to feel about themselves? My children are our future. I hope that you teach them to include their peers and value themselves regardless of their sexual identity, and above all, that love triumphs, always.
My name is Cheryl Huey, and I have 3 kids in the Vigo County School System. This is one of them. Her name is Kristen, and she identifies as cisgender lesbian. And I just want to tell a little story about something that happened at school. She was in gym class, and this boy took pictures of her, grabbed at her bag and called her a fag, asked what was in her bag. Now, I did go to the school, and the principal did take care of it, But my thinking is, if they had more comprehensive education as far as LGBTQ issues are concerned, maybe this wouldn't have happened to her. She has a lot of friends in the community who are afraid to come out and be who they are because of the bullying and the homophobia and, just issues like that that come up when it, comes to this community. And I would like to see maybe, hopefully, a eradication of that. But hopefully, if we start with comprehensive sex education, we can have other kids who understand, the other side. And I don't know, I'm really nervous. We'll just be able to maybe eradicate the hate if everyone learns about the other side.
It's okay.
You did a great job, Mom.
Thank you both, Martina and Cheryl, for speaking about your personal experience. What I want to leave you with is my own personal experience. So I'm a 45-year-old out lesbian. I came out at 20 in the 90s, and I felt safer then than I do now. When I moved here, bought a house, I had my gay flag for the month of June hanging in my backyard because I was too afraid to put it in my front yard. My neighbors next door looked at me and said, what's your flag doing in the back? You should put it out front. And I'm like, I'm too scared, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I should. What if I become a target for hate? I'm 45 years old and an educator. Why should I be afraid? But I am. So do you know what my neighbors did? They put a gay flag out, and they're straight. I put my gay flag out. And then somebody down the street did. And that's how it happens. And it doesn't happen any other way. So we can throw stats, we can say all these things, but it is each one of our lives that is so important. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ruth Hill Bro, attorney and parent of 2 Vigo County School Corporation students.
Words matter. I learned that as an attorney for the past 25 years, and as a writer and editor before that for my undergrad university, where English was one of my majors. I learned that words matter in a wide variety of leadership roles over the years, including the 7 years I spent as the chair of a membership and diversity committee in the leading National Bar Association. I've also learned that words matter in my role as a parent of 2 daughters in the Vigo County School Corporation. And I just learned from Melissa about how much words matter as well. These words take many forms. I'm going to talk about 4 of them here. 1, words that matter form our laws in this country, including Indiana, and particularly regarding tonight's topic, sex education. 2, words that matter are found in the decisions of our courts, including the highest court of the land, the U.S. Supreme Court, where equal justice under law is enshrined. 3, words that matter are found in the policies and statements of the Vigo County School Corporation, including its anti-bullying policy and its anti-discrimination statement, promising diversity and inclusion. And 4, words that matter are found in the education that our students receive, including sex education, which many of these presentations have said are meant to help them throughout their lives. Words matter. They're important, and they're also important to get right. So let's consider these 4 types of words that matter as they affect our topic here tonight. 1, laws. Several times over the course of these last 2 hearings, we've heard speakers mention Indiana law. It's important to understand what this means, as some of the commentary seems to assume that the law is not a floor. in other words, the minimum, but rather it's a ceiling, permitting nothing else. Well, Indiana Code, and I'll say section 2030-513, requires that with respect to instruction on sex education and STDs, accredited schools meet the following criteria. And we've heard these a few times, and I'll go over them here. 3 things. 1, require a teacher to teach abstinence from sexual activity outside of marriage as the expected standard for all school-age children. Note, that's school-age children, not adults. As we've said, we want to equip them for not just now, but in their adult lives, as we do with other courses in the school curriculum. 2, it says that we must include in the instruction that abstinence from sexual activity is the only certain way to avoid out-of-wedlock pregnancy, STDs, and other associated health problems. Note, it does not say that abstinence from sexual activity is the only thing to be presented. The explanation that it's the only certain way to avoid pregnancy and STDs should be included. That is not required to be the whole instruction. And 3, the Indiana law says you must include in the instruction that the best way to avoid STDs and other associated health problems is to establish a mutually faithful monogamous relationship in the context of marriage. Note, it does not say that a mutually faithful monogamous relationship is the only thing to be presented. The law says that the instruction should include instruction that is the best way. It doesn't say the only way. And it is something that is included. Again, it's not required to be the whole instruction. We also see this with the AIDS statute. And I'm not going to go into detail on that, but in relevant part, it says that literature that's given to children must state that the best way to avoid AIDS is for young people to refrain from sexual activity until they're ready as adults to establish, in the context of marriage, a mutually faithful monogamous relationship. Again, the statute says you must say it is the best way, not the only way. So comments that we heard at these meetings that say that teaching abstinence is, quote, the only method in keeping with the Indiana Code simply are not true. And we heard yesterday from CPR's own coordinator, Rebecca Losi, that abstinence, which many describe as the gold standard, has a high failure rate. She said that 39.5% of 9th to 12th graders have had sex, and nearly 30% are currently sexually active in the last 3 months. That is despite the curriculum being in the school for 24 years. That presents a lot of risk: pregnancy, STDs, and other things. Indiana law does not prevent sex education courses to talk about other things to decrease risk. And as a public health matter, it makes sense to do so. I'll give you a current example that I think will resonate. The gold standard for COVID-19 is to stay at home, avoid contact with others. That's the only way to guarantee you won't get the virus or transmit it to others. And we've seen that countless times in reports from experts, educational materials, and so on. But we don't stop there. We say wear masks, social distance, wash your hands, avoid crowds, and so on. None of us in this room is adhering to the gold standard. Or to paraphrase the doctor yesterday, we haven't chosen to make this simple lifestyle adjustment. The reality is that many people will leave their homes. And how do we protect them and others? We would never just say, don't leave your house. You're on your own if you venture out. Similarly, Indiana law does not prevent us providing information on decreasing risk, other than the, quote, gold standard abstinence. And if nearly 40% of our children, notwithstanding our best efforts, are going to engage at least once in sexual activity between 9th and 12th grade, don't we want to give them the equivalent of wear a mask, wash your hands? Indiana law does not prevent this instruction, nor does it prohibit our instruction from being inclusive to everyone, LGBTQ, the disabled, etc. Words matter, and they don't prevent us from providing better sex education. And dozens of schools across Indiana know this because they don't use that CPR curriculum. Now, let's talk about court decisions. Melissa touched on this. 5 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court declared a fundamental right for same-sex couples to marry. The Constitution guarantees that right. Yet, has our marriage and abstinence-focused curriculum been reviewed to reflect that recognition of this basic human and constitutional right? A couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down another landmark decision by ruling that the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is itself a federal anti-bias law, protects gay, lesbian, and transgender workers from discrimination based on sex. These decisions reflect a cultural transformation in this country. Ask yourself whether our CPR curriculum has reflected this. 3, let's talk about Vigo County's own words. Words matter, especially when they're the words that are promised from our school. Vigo County School Corporation has committed itself to embracing diversity and inclusion and reducing bullying. And those commitments must be reflected in our sex education and health classes, which some teachers have described as among the most important and relevant classes that the students will ever take. Discrimination, right there on the homepage, says the policy of the Vigo County School Corporation is that there will be no discrimination made on the basis of race, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, or handicap in the educational services or activities which it supports. The anti-bullying policy has been trumpeted for years. My daughter won the school-wide elementary anti-bullying poster. She went to the board, etc. It's a big deal. I know it's a big deal in this school corporation. You're seeking to decrease the creation of a hostile environment. Such bullying can include physical, verbal, electronic and written communications, and social relational, which the school corporation says includes leaving someone out on purpose. But isn't that what our sex education is doing for so many of our students? And it also says bullying fosters a climate of fear and disrespect that can seriously impair the physical and psychological health of its victims and create conditions that negatively affect learning. Now, a speaker last night fully acknowledged that our school's sex education program does not address the needs of the LGBT community. And then she went on to say, but we don't have to. The Supreme Court might disagree with that. The Vigo County School Corporation's own non-discrimination policy says that there will be no discrimination in educational services or activities. And if Vigo County cares about its anti-bullying policy, it does need to consider such needs. Finally, 4, the words in our sex education curriculum, including CPR. So many LGBT students don't feel cared for and heard, as some of the students last night said about their CPR instruction, which is geared in its message and its words to a segment of our student body. What evidence do we have that CPR has taken steps to incorporate these considerations into lessons to ensure that all kids see themselves reflected in the curriculum and that they see their peers as part of the discussion as well? Has the school corporation had diversity and inclusion experts review what CPR is teaching to ensure that it does not reflect unconscious bias? And marriage is the gold standard. And by the way, the Supreme Court has recognized the constitutional right of same-sex couples to marry. So thus, shouldn't it be reflected in our curriculum? Have we considered whether what CPR is teaching, however positive it might be in some ways, and for some kids, is not actually creating unconscious bias in our students, which then infects their interactions with other students and in their lives going forward. And that manifests itself in bullying and hate crimes. And we have seen in recent weeks how unconscious bias is hidden in plain sight in virtually every aspect of our lives. If we've learned nothing in the past few weeks, we've learned that. So embracing diversity and inclusion, reducing bullying, which often focuses on targeting people who are different, require us to meaningfully address issues of sexuality, gender identity, disability, and abuse, etc. It requires us to be fully inclusive of students who, not only in their participation in the room, but also in the words that we choose to say to them. Any review of the curriculum, particularly the CPR portion, which has not been reviewed by the CDC and countless universities, should include experts in these areas. If we are not careful, the very education meant to help our students may be creating or reinforcing harmful stereotypes that affect LGBTQ and other students in diverse categories. The historian Henry Adams said that a teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops. Now, many assume, it's one of a favorite quote of mine, I'm sure many of you have heard it, many assume that he was talking about the positive effect that a teacher can have, and that is certainly true. But he was actually talking about the dangers of bad education. It requires us to do and permits us to do. What promises we as a school corporation have made to our students, and whether we truly are keeping those promises. And the words we use in talking to our students. Words matter. and so do our children, all of them.
Our next speaker is Charlotte Olson. Ms. Olson is a recent graduate at Terre Haute South Vigo.
Hello. As she said, I'm a recent graduate. I didn't prepare any statistics for you. I'm just here to be honest. So my first introduction to sexual education was in 5th grade, when our teacher separated the boys from the girls and sent the boys to the gym for movies while all of the girls filed into one classroom. I remember sitting in a huddled group on the floor as 2 teachers showed us pictures on a large screen of pads and tampons and told us we'd use them for our periods, but didn't go further to explain how to use them, how to open them, or how to ask for them. The products never even left the packaging, and I remember leaving more confused than I came in. They informed us that we were now privy to an infamous female secret, which was not allowed to be mentioned to anyone else, and especially not a man. Most of us were too afraid to ask the questions that we did have, and that we did create, because we didn't want to be labeled as curious about sex or interested in growing up like that. I remember leaving upset and more confused, and like somehow we were being punished for an uncontrollable biological function. And after that, for all of us, it was whispers in the hallway and after class where we'd ask about our own bodies, and we'd trade information we'd gleaned from older siblings like it was some kind of valuable currency. And that was all we learned until middle school, when we sat in our science classroom and listened as a volunteer talked to us about the immorality of sex before marriage. She used demonstrations and games to teach us about abstinence and the horrors of unsafe sex. She even asked me and another kid to stand up, and she cut a strip of tape that she stuck on my arm and then pulled off and held up to the light to show that the skin cells that it had torn off that remained on the tape. And then she said, "This is what sex before marriage represents, impurity. If you have sex before marriage, you're unworthy of your partner." She even had us chew up Oreos and then spit them into a cup of water, and then she walked around mixing them to show how STDs spread among unclean partners. They pushed a narrative that any sex at all, any sex for pleasure, was a violation of your place and a violation of your future. They preached the sins and indecency of sex before marriage, or sex with anyone who you don't intend to marry. None of the information they covered even opened up the option of having safe or enjoyable sex. The only options we got were to choose post-marital sex or sin. Even more damaging, they presented statistics on big, blown-up, colorful pie charts about the rates of HIV and AIDS in gay men, spreading the image that gay sex is wrong to a group of children attempting to fit in with their peers around them. And at that developmental age, when many young people are just discovering themselves, the ideology they were and still are spreading is extremely dangerous. And it is important to educate young people on HIV and AIDS. However, their use of charts and presentation of information make gay sex and gay love a thing to be condemned and avoided. In the way they delivered these facts to us, they communicated that there are only negatives to same-sex relationships, and especially in relationships between 2 men. And while some of this you may try to pass off as a use of data as necessary in educating about the danger of HIV and AIDS, but you will choose to ignore that this consistent push of the dangers of gay love will have irreversible damage on the psyche of young LGBTQ students. By cultivating an environment in which students learn that gay love spreads disease, they're knowingly planting the seeds of homophobia into young people's minds. And as a result, those young people who are discovering their sexuality will live afraid that their peers and friends will become disgusted towards them because of the way they love and who they love. Their curriculum also completely erases the existence of lesbians. And in all of the sex ed classes I've sat through, they've avoided acknowledging that women can and do love women. So for young women who are discovering their sexuality, this avoidance of their own existence and of their love is extremely damaging. It creates an environment in which young women feel unsafe to express and to embrace their truest selves. It also communicates to their classmates that lesbian love is invalid, and because it's not mentioned in the classroom, it's not real. Erasure of one's sexuality has long-term, detrimental effects that pressure students to stay closeted and to stay afraid of who they love. And as such, erasure at the earliest stages of learning for young people helps in upholding the systemic biases that condemn people who love people of the same sex. And in our sex ed classrooms, gay love was something to be afraid of, but lesbian love was non-existent. Quite vividly, I remember an instructor who shared his past as a womanizer and as someone who frequently had and engaged in sex for pleasure. He emphasized how often he got STDs, a result of his rapid, unsafe style of sex, and how that continued contraction of STDs finally convinced him to find a solution to his, quote, sex craze. However, instead of taking that opportunity to educate us on how to have safe sexual encounters, he took the time to spread a misogynistic narrative about the need for female partners to be pure, and went on to describe how he would have refused to marry his wife had she been sexually active before his marriage, despite his less than clean past with sex. And by sharing this with us, he upheld a system of sexist regulations that are used to control women's actions with their own bodies and justified to every young man sitting in that room the use of women's bodies for their own pleasure at any extent. This story played into the idea that women hold the responsibility of remaining pure, remaining virgins for their partners. And if they do not, they instantly become an unusable and unlovable thing that's not worthy of marriage. To young women attempting to gain ground in a world already determined to provide as many obstacles for them as it can, hearing this so early on forced those sexist regulations into our own heads. That class taught young women that the responsibility of being safe sexually fell to them. It upheld misogynistic views that control women's decisions and did nothing to support the young people becoming capable of making their own decisions and keeping full control over their own sexual choices. To further this narrative, they express the unsafe and ungodly nature of abortions and how they tarnish a woman's reputation. And at the end, most of us walked away feeling worse than before, because as growing young people in a supposedly modern world, we had just been told that we were to be treated as incapable of making our own decisions in regards to our own body. There was no discussion of sexual assault. There was no discussion on reporting it, witnessing it, or experiencing it. And as such, most young people grow up and go through life not understanding that what they are experiencing or what they have experienced in the past is sexual assault. And in later years, many of us would discover that we had experienced it, or that our friends had. And because of our lack of information and resources, we were unable to recognize our traumatic experiences as they occurred. It endangers young people as they grow, because we were never taught how to practice safe sex or how to gain access to products to make sex safe. We became much more likely to engage in unsafe sex. For young women, they criminalized the act of talking about our periods, making us afraid that someone may see the tampon we'd hidden in our sleeve on the way to the bathroom. For LGBTQ youth, it spread the stigma that their lifestyle is incorrect or dirty, which is extremely harmful and perpetrates not only hatred, but fear. In my high school health class, the only options given were to never have sex before marriage, or to be labeled as wholly unfit for marriage. This philosophy encourages a vicious culture that encourages the maltreatment of any person choosing to have sex for pleasure. To appropriately educate our children on this subject, we need comprehensive instructions on menstruation processes for young women. Additionally, proper education on LGBTQ+ safe sex practices, options on resources available to ensure young people have every chance to practice safe sex, and a presentation of the dangers of STDs without traumatizing the classroom into believing their peers hold those diseases. It should include information about puberty and reproduction, contraception and condoms, relationships, sexual violence recognition and prevention, body image, gender identity, and sexual orientation. It should also be taught by trained teachers, not volunteers, to ensure every student feels safe and represented with an opportunity to learn more about their discovery of themselves. At such an important developmental age as middle school, you all remember, young people should be able to understand how their bodies work and be provided with a safe space to learn the correct answers to the questions they walk around asking their friends. And we should not have to rely on the internet to teach us the basics about our own body. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ellie Hampton. Ms. Hampton is a recent graduate of Terre Haute, Vigo. She is currently a psychology major at Indiana State University.
Hello. I have spoken to you once before about why it is vital to implement different sex education curriculum in our schools. As a recent graduate from Vigo County, my experience with the current CPR curriculum is recent and fresh in my mind. Sadly, the things I learned from CPR were not things that prepared me for adulthood, but rather an awakening to the reality that I would have to educate myself. As a middle schooler, I had no expectations for what I should be taught. However, I remember being confused very quickly. CPR is rooted in abstinence-only education. I was told that I should not have sex until I was married. Immediately, I began to wonder, what if I never get married? What then? This is where the issues begin. Any curriculum based around marriage is inherently ideological. Public schools are a diverse place filled with a myriad of different religions and cultures. Any curriculum centered around the concept of marriage is immediately culturally exclusive and inappropriate in public education. Sadly, the issues with CPR curriculum only expand from there. While my friends and I were in CPR, various examples were performed with the intent to induce shame at the idea of sex before marriage. I previously shared with you the tape and Oreo exercises, like you heard from the previous speaker as well, where we were taught how gross and corrupted we would be if we engaged in premarital sex. I also shared with you the inappropriate behaviors of my CPR instructor when he shared with us how he could never truly love his wife due to his previous sexual relationships, and how he laughed in the face of a student asking how to use a condom. By teaching us that sex makes us gross and undesirable, adolescents are taught that their bodies are not their own. When a grown man who is supposed to be educating students laughs at someone asking how to use a condom, this is not only shameful, but also a direct refusal to constructively teach sexual safety and health. One of the few constants in college is consent education. Practically the minute I stepped on campus, I was required to attend a seminar that taught what consent is, how to give it, how to ask for it, etc. I am now a junior, and I have been to several more seminars like this since then. Consent is vitally important, especially because 1 in every 6 American women is a victim of sexual assault. Additionally, people of the ages 12 to 34 are at the highest risk for sexual assault. These statistics should shock you, they should make you mad, it should make you want to change things. Luckily, you can change things. If the first time young adults are truly taught about consent and sexual relationships is when they are 18, think about how many young people we are leaving vulnerable. 2 of my close personal friends are victims of sexual assault, and they were both in high school when it occurred. CPR curriculum may claim to teach consent, but consent is far more complex than simply saying no to sex before you're married. Consent includes specific types of sexual interaction, the ability to withdraw consent at any time, and knowing what is appropriate and what is not. The sad truth is many young women are assaulted, and they do not even realize because they were never taught what is acceptable and what is not. They were never taught how to have control over their own bodies. Young adults need to be taught how to give and ask for consent so they do not inadvertently harm others or become victims of harm. If we do not teach our students these things, we leave them vulnerable to life-altering trauma. Despite what CPR proponents would like you to believe, we're not asking for sex education that promotes sexual behavior. We're asking for up-to-date, medically accurate curriculum that educates and empowers students of all cultures, religions, and sexual orientations. Young people need to be provided the necessary information to stay safe. Young adults need a no-nonsense education of anatomy, sexual and reproductive health, including STIs and HIV, and consent. We need to learn how to keep ourselves physically safe, but also mentally and emotionally. The American Journal of Nursing cites research that shows abstinence education is positively correlated with teen pregnancy. The more abstinence is stressed, the higher the rates of teen pregnancy are. This finding is in a peer-reviewed scientific journal and is mirrored in many, many others. But frankly, I should not have to tell you this. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in the school board, and I am disappointed in the school system. A 20-year-old college student should not have to stand here and beg you to look at the data. I should not have to ask the professionals charged with educating our children to fact-check the curriculum they are supporting. It took me a singular Google search to find the multitude of scientific works on the unethical practices of Crisis Pregnancy Center. The most compelling was published by the AMA Journal of Ethics, outlining how the religious ideology of Crisis Pregnancy Center takes priority over the health and well-being of the people seeking care in their centers. This source, along with many others detailing the gross misinformation and harm that Crisis Pregnancy Center, Creating Positive Relationships, and other abstinence-based education curriculum cause, is readily available and easily accessible online. Do not sacrifice the safety and health of the students you are supposed to be caring for because of an outdated sectional ideology and community opinion. Your own comfort should not be more important than your students. Do the research, ask the professionals, and do the right thing.
Our next speaker is Craig Mile. Ms. Craig Mile is a 2013 graduate of Terrell South and a former volunteer at Crisis Pregnancy Center.
Hello, Vigo County School Corporation Board. Thank you for listening to our concerns this evening. My name is Claire Craigmile. I am a lifelong resident of Terre Haute. I am a graduate of Terre Haute South class of 2013. I am autistic, I am a queer woman, and I am also a former Crisis Pregnancy Center volunteer. Wednesday, July 1st, I created and posted a survey on Facebook inviting former and current students of Vigo County schools to evaluate their sex education experiences. It received 1,000 responses within the first 24 hours it was up. So far, it has had more than 180 shares on Facebook. It has steadily gained more responses and is now up to 1,224. And I am surprised by the level of engagement given its kind of a long survey. The Vigo County sex ed curriculum ranked very poorly with former and current Vigo County students. As you can see by the graph I put in front of you and in front of the board members, nearly 80% who took the survey ranked our sex ed curriculum a 5 out of 10 or lower. The written comments are very extensive and consistent in saying that the sex ed taught in Vigo County over the last nearly 30 years has not changed much. It is generally ineffective. It is non-inclusive. It neglects and does harm to the students it vows to educate and protect. I understand that there are limits to what this survey can show conclusively. It is not for a clinical paper, and I never claimed to be sampling the population. But scientifically significant or not, the total numbers do indicate that a lot of former and current students have an opinion on this and have an interest in this topic. I am going to read just a few of the hundreds of comments I received. In the packet before you, I have printed more comments for you to review. The comments I gave you are still just a handful out of the so many I received that I can't even sift through them all yet. Those are just what I considered the best of the best to kind of give you a profile on the student experience. So I'm gonna please listen to the voices of Vigo County students, past and present, who took their time to write these. Question: what is your overall opinion of the sex education curriculum in Vigo County? It was abysmal. We were not taught anything other than abstinence. The woman from the CPC came into my middle school class and had us chew an Oreo and spit it into a cup and pass it around the class. She told us the more people you have sex with, the dirtier you are, and that abstinence was the only way to be safe and avoid pregnancy until marriage. The woman teaching refused to address birth control, Plan B, assault, abortion, LGBTQ issues, etc. The irresponsibility of the school corporation in this is shameful. Question: did the sex education you received in Vigo County schools affect your self-esteem? Absolutely. As a young woman, I felt shamed for having sexual urges. I felt that acting on those urges in any way was wrong. I felt that my virginity was put on a pedestal and that I would be damaged if that was taken away from me. It created a real source of fear and self-loathing that I did not shake until well into my 20s. I was sexually abused before middle school, and when I got to sex ed classes, I felt ashamed and even more confused. Yes, especially when they compared us to chewed up Oreos or crumpled up paper and basically told us no one would want us if we had sex before marriage because we were used and ruined. Yes, I was suspended for bringing up the issue of my sexuality, reprimanded for being inappropriate. I still have the white slip. Question: what do you think the Vigo County School Corporation could do better in regard to their sex education curriculum? Be more educational on consent, different methods of birth control, domestic abuse, sexual harassment, assault, safe sex, different sexually oriented relationships, and don't scare kids from having sex or shame them for having it. Question: additional comments and concerns? My mother let me wake up in a pool of my own blood when I first got my period. Everyone failed me along the way. I learned about my body from a Tampax box, and that's super horrid. I chose to abstain from marriage, and even I feel very failed by the education I received. Eventually, those of us who abstain until marriage will have sex. Sex exists. We still need to be informed. Now, I'd like to tell you about my own experiences. My sex education was very limited growing up. Between my parents and my freshman health class, I only really learned that sex is for procreation among married couples, and fear tactics about STDs and pregnancy. I myself was very devoted to the purity culture I was raised in. In my early teens, I became a volunteer for the CPC. One of their employees was my chaperone to what my parents called pro-life boot camp, where I learned about anti-abortion apologetics, how to argue with my peers on abortion issues, and how to start my own pro-life club in my school. For a time, I was a tool in indoctrinating my peers about their mission. Around my junior year, I looked back at my high school experience, and I saw how judgmental and hateful I had been toward my peers, and how that affected my ability to connect with them. I decided I didn't want to be that person anymore. From then on, I have researched and been passionate about realistic and healthy sex education. But that's not the only part of my story that brings me here tonight. Throughout my adolescence, I was preyed on by 3 different grown men via online messaging and texting. All 3 of these men were involved with my church youth groups. The first man, who was age 26 when it started, groomed me from when I was 13 to 15. He was my childhood best friend's older brother. Our families were very close. We did everything together, and he watched me grow up. As a lonely teen who was unknowingly on the autism spectrum, I did not see that he viewed me in a romantic way until I looked back at the messages as a fully realized adult. The second man, who was 24 when I was just under 17, viewed me more sexually. He told me explicitly that he befriended me when I was closer to 18, so he wouldn't have to wait so long before it was legal to have sex with me. I dated the third man for 2 years, beginning when I was 17 and in high school, and he was 21 and in college, at the urging of my parents and church friends. I didn't learn what a healthy relationship looked like until I was 19 and realized my autonomy. The sex ed I received from the schools and my parents didn't prepare me for a sexual relationship between 2 consenting adults, and it didn't teach me the signs of a predator or that a grown man should not want to be friends with an adolescent girl. My sex ed did not give me the tools or the language to recognize that I was being groomed for most of my adolescent years. and it did not give me the language to recognize my sexual orientation. When I was a teen, there was either gay or straight. Queer wasn't an identity, it was a slur. I had to learn about my identity on my own over many years. As it has been said, all we are asking is that the committee review the curriculum that has been taught for the last almost 30 years and determine if it's medically accurate, age-appropriate, and inclusive to not just LGBTQ students, but also students with disabilities. Students like me who can't always pick up on the signs of communication from people and can't always tell that people who say they want to be our friends are actually taking advantage of us. I'd like to also suggest that we ask if it is effective. Is it for the benefit and protection of the students as it claims to be, or is this curriculum and culture about holding on to control, both of our schools and our students' attention? The sex education curriculum, as it has been and is today, is ineffective and in many cases, including my own, harmful. Because it fails the students it is supposed to protect and teach. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ruth Fairbanks. Ruth is Senior Instructor in Gender Studies and History at Indiana State University. Dr. Fairbanks has a child just entering high school and another who has just graduated. Over the past 10 years, she has also taught many Bcsc graduates.
Thank you. I want to start off with some questions. How does the Vigo County School Corporation normally choose a curriculum? Forgive me, but this seems like a very strange way to assess and adopt curriculum. Is sexual health education being treated differently? Or can we look forward in the coming year to listening sessions on geometry, automotive collision repair, marketing, and band? In addition to the unique treatment that this particular curriculum seems to be getting, the long overdue evaluation of CPR has diverged from what we understood and what was printed in the paper before the pandemic. What are the results of the outside review that the school corporation agreed to in early February? If this outside review hasn't been done, why not? This fits into a longer pattern with CPR. Among us here tonight are many parents who have repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with CPR to teachers, to principals, and to the school corporation. All of us were assured that no one else had ever had a problem with it. We were brushed aside in the hopes that we would let it drop. In the packet before you, there's another example of this. If you turn to B, you will find a newspaper story about a group of high school students who came to a board meeting in October 2018 to ask for a better curriculum. What did you do when the people who you serve asked you for help? Wait for them to graduate? The only one who seems to have noticed is a reporter from the Trib Star. I'm going to skip the rest of my remarks because you know what I would say, and there are many people here tonight who haven't had as many chances to talk to you as I have. So I'm just going to go over this packet that I've left for you here. In it you will also find some other documents, leading with Mr. Hayward's very strong statement on inclusivity of June 2nd. Also, comments from those who, for health concerns, could not attend tonight. I've also included some broader indications of bipartisan support for quality, broad sexual health education, including the results of some national surveys, and also the resolution passed by the Vigo County League of Women Voters in March. And you will find as the concluding document a recent peer-reviewed meta-analysis on the effectiveness of abstinence, or actually I should say the ineffectiveness of abstinence only until marriage curriculum. I won't read it for you because I know you can all read. So I'm going to conclude here and bring in our next speaker. I just want to say that I look forward to seeing the school corporation measure the needs of our current students, investigate a range of available curriculum, and adopt one that is medically accurate, up to date, inclusive of LGBTQ students and students with disabilities, that is free from shaming and that is age appropriate. And now I'd like leave to call Dr. Martland.
While Ruth's calling, I'll introduce Nancy Martland. Nancy has a PhD in child development and has worked with children and families in educational settings for
Hello,
many
Dr.
years.
Martland? Yes, okay. We're going to see how this works. Thank you. Did you use speaker or just what
Yeah,
did
we
you
just use that.
So speakerphone, and then hold the bottom part of your phone, right like that. There you go.
Okay, Dr. Martland, you can go ahead.
I don't think you have it on speaker.
Oh, okay. Dr. Martland?
Yes.
Okay.
Should I speak?
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Go.
go.
I'm Dr. Nancy Martland. I have a PhD in child development. I spent my professional life working with youngsters of all ages, from toddlers right up to college students. In my professional opinion, withholding relevant information from children and adolescents truncates their ability to understand themselves and to understand our expectations of them, potentially preventing the very behaviors we wish to encourage. I am shocked that my grandchildren are exposed to a program that fails to convey accurate, impartial, and complete education about sexual matters. In particular, I object to its religion-based abstinence and quote-unquote purity core. Religious beliefs vary widely. They should not determine which facts our students are given related to human sexuality any more than they should determine which facts are taught related to biology, geology, or anything else. Our schools should not be used to advance one particular view. So tonight, I urge you to listen to the voices of your own students who have lived through this defective program as they tell you about negative effects it has had on them. I urge you to discount the scare tactics you have heard regarding factual sex education. Surely, if such claims were true, the good people of Bloomington and elsewhere would not allow such a program to be delivered to their children. I urge you to examine other programs that fulfill Indiana law but deliver a fuller, more factual, and broadly inclusive education. A responsible sex education program, one worthy of a public school system whose mission is to, quote, equip students with lifelong learning skills and prepare them to be productive and responsible citizens, should give our kids the information required to understand their own needs, make healthy choices, and protect themselves from unwanted consequences. Abstinence is one way for kids to avoid risk. However, abstinence only is insufficient to address the needs of our kids. We do our kids no favors by keeping them in the dark about sexuality in the mistaken belief that ignorance will protect them. Just compare the 2019 teen pregnancy rate for our county and Monroe County, where a factual approach is used. Vigo County's rate is 34 per 1,000 teen girls. Monroe County's is just 8 per 1,000 teen girls. We owe it to our kids to strengthen them with knowledge that enables healthy sexuality. To stigmatize a natural human response is not only foolish, it injures our kids. Overlaying fear, guilt, shame, and anxiety onto natural human behavior is harmful now and can have lifelong deleterious effects. You will have a chance tonight to hear from Vigo students who suffered due to this program. Please, please take them seriously. Allowing CPC to use our schools to deliver its ideology-based message deceives the public. You claim to provide sex education, when in reality, you deliver a narrow, religion-based set of admonitions, myths, and half-truths, avoid a full discussion of human sexuality, and fail to give our kids the tools to make good choices. Our kids, yours and mine, deserve better. I thank you for giving me this time.
So I'm going to take a leaf out of Ruth's book. I've had the privilege of addressing the board several times over the last 10 months, and I know there are a lot of new people who want to speak tonight, and I don't want to silence their voices. So I really just want to explain the resources that I've given you. Over the past 10 months, we've had the opportunity to look at a lot of alternative curricula that are out there. There is a wealth of information, and as we've all heard beautifully explained tonight by Ruth Rowe, the lawyer who is here, they're perfectly legal to use. So the first thing that I've shared with you is some national standards, national sexuality education standards by grade level. They're put out by a group called Future of Sex Education, which is a partnership of various organizations focusing on youth and health. So I encourage you to take a look at those. They're beautifully laid out. What I would say about that is that all community members will not agree about all of them, but there is a tremendous amount here that most of us can wholeheartedly support. I think it's a good starting point. Forgive me, I've made a total mess of my notes, crossing things out. As I said, looking through lots of curricula, we found sample lessons. And so what I have here, and I've given this to you, is a sample lesson called Understanding Gender. It's about biological sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And it's from a group called Advocates for Youth, based in Washington, D.C. This lesson has nothing comparable in the current health curriculum, or certainly not in CPR. I hope you will read it. I'm really not qualified to judge it. I'm not a member of the LGBTQ community, but I've certainly read this and I think it's engaging, it's thoughtful, it seems sensitive, it's educational, it teaches important language and vocabulary, and as we've heard tonight, words really matter. This lesson is not scary, it's not dangerous, but it is important. So again, I hope you will read it. We have also provided sample lessons from a variety of different programs on abstinence, decision-making, STI transmission, topics like this, and we've compared them to the CPR lessons on the same topics. So that's all I have to say, and I'm going to let someone else speak now. Thank you. I have to say one more thing. I attended last Monday night's session in which the school corporation health curriculum was discussed. And I want to be clear, that session was focused heavily on the health curriculum, not the CPR curriculum, which, as we've heard tonight several times, has still not been independently evaluated. A long list of topics and page numbers was read from the supplementary workbook. Topics like refusal skills, controlling sexual desires, STDs, wet dreams, sexual orientation, questioning gender identity, trans issues, and coming out. And it was implied that this is part of the health curriculum. However, that workbook has never been used in the school corporation. And we know that because we were in a meeting last November with the curriculum coordinator where we were shown that same workbook and told that it had never been used. And we weren't allowed to borrow it because it was the only copy. Last Tuesday's Tribune Star, the very next day, included a statement from the curriculum director that, quote, "The supplemental middle school book is available to middle school teachers, but it is not mandatory." And we asked a number of recent middle school students, and they confirmed that they had not covered these topics in their health classes. And so we want to bring this up because we need to feel that there's transparency in this process and that we are getting a complete and accurate picture of what's being taught to our children. And I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tracy McNeil.
I only have one document.
Just one moment, we're changing the battery at the bottom.
Okay.
I am a parent, and I'm a nurse, and I have 23 years of nursing experience, 13 of those years in nursing education. I came here tonight with a prepared speech. However, I was really shocked to find out that Oreos are part of the health education that students are getting as far as sexually transmitted diseases and sexual health. I'm going to say that I echo a lot of the previous speakers, actually all of the previous speakers, with a statement of no decision about us without us, and there should not be one person that's making this decision. And if we were going to start from scratch, we probably would not choose our current curriculum. And I think it's time to start from scratch. But I'm going to speak to you from my experience as a nurse. I'm going to discuss some of the teaching that I do with my students that I feel is relevant to the discussion. One of the things I teach my nursing students is what to do if they have a contaminated needle stick. An example of a contaminated needle is one that has been used to start an IV and may have a patient's HIV-infected blood in it. If you get stuck with it, you could get HIV too. I teach my students how to use the angiocath needle and how to reduce the risk of getting stuck by it. Despite my best teaching, I know needle sticks will still happen. When nurses have a contaminated needle stick, we must seek medical treatment to reduce the risk of becoming HIV positive. It is highly effective if started early and useless if started too late. HIV post-exposure prophylaxis is used in emergency situations only, but it isn't just for nurses. It is used after consenting and non-consenting sexual acts, and it is for adults as well as minors. Victims of rape have many challenges to overcome, but pregnancy and HIV risk can be significantly reduced. Students must be aware that proper medical care can prevent HIV and pregnancy in many cases. And no, I am not talking about an abortion pill. I'm talking about real prevention. Plan B and HIV post-exposure prophylaxis are evidence-based emergency medical treatments. Every single hour is important to the effectiveness of treatment. Delaying treatment can be life-threatening. Teaching must be done before it is needed and before you know who will need it. Evidence-based practice isn't based on satisfaction surveys. Our outcomes should be reduced pregnancy rates, reduced STDs, increased scientific health knowledge, and acceptance of others. Our students deserve proper education from properly educated people. Telling my students not to get stuck with a needle isn't adequate education because it still happens. The same applies for sex ed. Nobody likes abortions, unintended pregnancy, or financial and educational hardships. Students need timely, age-appropriate sex education. In my experience, parents tend to misjudge what is age-appropriate teaching. Education about STDs and pregnancy prevention that is given after becoming sexually active is inadequate. By the current program's own data, the education is unlikely to change personal behavior. If it doesn't change behavior, it isn't changing the important outcomes. We need to do better than this. We need to start over. And I would also like to add that this brave woman was talking about her experience as an autistic person. And I will tell you that the statistics are also there to support that her experience is not unique. People with intellectual, developmental disabilities, people who are not neurotypical, are targets. And they need education too. We need to protect. We need to protect our children, and we need to protect the most vulnerable of our children. And we're not doing that right now. And frankly, I am very offended by what I am hearing that my kids have been taught through this program. No, my kids did not come home and tell me everything that they learned in sex ed. And I would expect that that's probably not an unusual circumstance for parents. I'd like to see better. And I'm going to tell you that the amount of education and my starting point when dealing with entry-level nursing students is not what I would expect it to be at. Thank you.
Tracy was the first speaker for hour 2.
Okay, thank you.
Next speaker is Christy Myers.
Hi, I'm Christy Myers, and I'm going to gloss over some of the points that have already been spoken about. I'm here to advocate for people with disabilities. They say you always fear what you don't understand. I believe that's often true, and can make life extremely hard for people with disabilities. It is very hard for those who lack any kind of physical, cognitive, emotional, or developmental disabilities to relate to the daily struggle of those that live with them every day in a world that doesn't accommodate them. These challenges are only made worse when the curriculum we provide to children to teach them about navigating adult relationships ignores the unique concerns and point of view of those with disabilities. Such a curriculum only reinforces the sense that children with disabilities have every day that they are an outsider. This is assuming, of course, that children can access the curriculum at all, as those who are blind and deaf may be at an additional disadvantage, not to mention those who are neurotypical or may have cognitive impairments and are not taught with any modifications. Because I've seen the lesson plans for CPR, and there are no modifications mapped out or accommodations for them. That's unacceptable. A curriculum that is inaccurate and non-inclusive also does nothing to try to help non-disabled students to better understand their peers with disabilities. So by providing a curriculum that is not inclusive of the needs of all students, we're building more walls of division between those with disabilities and their peers. This at a time when they are going through an incredibly difficult period of emotional and physical development that will shape who they are for the rest of their lives. If sexual education is solely or even primarily focused on abstaining from sexual acts, we have failed as parents, as educators, as mentors, and as community members. Sexual education should be first and foremost about giving children accurate, up-to-date, and complete information they need to form healthy and happy relationships with others. Relationships that can one day become romantic and sexual. By only tailoring the sexual education curriculum to address the perceived needs of a particular group categorized as the norm, we are sending a message to young people with disabilities at a critical point in their lives that such relationships are only for other people. And not only can this leave children with disabilities feeling lonelier and more isolated, it also places them at greater risk of sexual exploitation and violence.
30 seconds.
Accurate and inclusive sexual education is not about teaching children that all sexual practices and expressions are right for them. It is acknowledging that they and their peers will experience love, relationships, and sex in different ways. It's about creating an environment of tolerance, friendship, love, and respect. It is only in this kind of environment that people with disabilities can flourish. If there is one thing we need now more than ever, it is less fear and more understanding. It is up to us to create an environment of understanding, and such an environment must include a curriculum that is inclusive, contains accurate information, and skills for a healthy lifetime. Thank you.
Next speaker is Dominique Moorfield.
I'm a Terre Haute native and I've gone to Vigo County schools my entire life. And one of the things that has struck out to me the most from the CPR curriculum was the shame-based teaching. I remember in 6th grade being passed around Hershey's Kisses in class and not being told what to do with it yet, but then all of us who did instinctively eat candy in 6th grade was later shamed because that Hershey Kiss was supposed to signify our purity and our body. And so after a lot of us had eaten the candy, we were later shamed by the teachers and the students because they felt they had the right to, because we were being taught that we were disposable and chewable like food and candy. Also, it stuck out to me later as an adult now, the lack of talk about sexual violence. And that also is different across the board with race. And that was one thing that was also never addressed. And so as a Black voice here, I think I should address that as well, because 1 in 4 Black girls do experience sexual assault by the age of 18, according to the American Psychological Association. And that's already, that's pretty high itself, but it's even higher for just girls in general. I'm saying that's higher than white counterparts, but the white counterparts statistic is high as well. And so a lot of people have already been preyed upon while they're getting the sex education or currently. I was one that had already experienced childhood sexual abuse by the time that I was taking my sex ed classes in middle and high school. And also, I had been preyed upon by an adult starting at the age of 14, and I never saw those signs and was never told by any of my educators that it was weird that a 20-something-year-old man wanted to talk to a 14-year-old girl. Also, I'm a part of the LGBTQ community. Now I identify as queer, but I didn't always. I was very confused about my sexual identity, whether it was being bisexual, pansexual, or queer. I was never told about those terms, really. I had heard about homosexual or straight, and that was basically it, and never really told that there was anything in between or that overlapped in that. I was never told about gender identities. And because of the shame-based teaching that we were given, I felt scared to ask questions about it. I was already hearing this message at church, and I believe in a separation of church and state. So why am I hearing the same message at church that I am hearing in school?
30 seconds.
And so what I mainly wanted to ask was that, do I not matter? Do students that look like me and have these feelings not matter? And more importantly, why is it being taught that people like me are inappropriate? Thank you.
Hello to the Vigo County School Corporation School Board and Dr. Hayworth. My name is Katie Luger, and I'm a licensed social worker, health sciences doctoral candidate, volunteer sexual violence victim advocate, Terre Haute resident, and alumni of the Vigo County School Corporation. Throughout my time as a student at Dixie B, Honey Creek, and Terre Haute South, the school corporation failed in equipping me and my peers to fully understand the necessary components of sex education. In 2006, as a 6th grader, I was told that we were all an apple with a star inside. A nice little imagery for you. But if you have sex with someone, that star is taken away and you become rotten. In 7th grade, I was strapped into a pregnancy suit and made to perform exercises throughout the room for 40 minutes to experience the misery of pregnancy. All of this occurred in classrooms populated by students who had already engaged in sexual activity or had been pregnant. When we tried to ask questions about anything outside of heterosexual relationships, we were immediately shut down and students were shamed for expressing any curiosity towards understanding anything outside of straight relationships. Thus, we were not supported in our own intellectual and identity development. Ultimately, the CPR program facilitates a shame-based curriculum. The abstinence-based education through CPR does not developmentally prepare students for future sexual encounters, and it shames students who have already engaged in sexual activities. I did not truly learn about consent until college, and I had to facilitate most of my own learning. The CPR curriculum did not prepare me for expressing my own boundaries, understanding contraceptive options, or communicating my own sexuality. I discovered the CPR program actually stunted my own growth, as I did not have the tools or skills to navigate the coming out process until age 24. and I'm only 26 now. I didn't have the vocabulary to understand my sexuality, even though I knew internally since age 5, and I never had the words to understand that I was pansexual. From my experiences as a student and the reports of recent graduates, the CPR program promotes fear of same-sex attraction, reinforces gender stereotypes in heterosexual relationships, mandates heterosexual marriage, and disparages non-traditional families. LGBTQ youth who experience high levels of family rejection are at a high risk for negative health outcomes. The combined forces of marginalization, stress, lack of support from their families, community, and school, and exclusionary sex education leads to LGBTQ youth having higher rates of attempted suicide, depression, drug use, and unprotected sex. A well-designed sex education program reduces negative health impacts and supports positive sexual health outcomes for students. At minimum, the Vigo County School Corporation sex education program must remove foundational messagings of shame and guilt and focus on empowerment and factual, non-stigmatizing information, be designed with the needs of LGBTQ students, students with disabilities, and students with a history of trauma in mind, and be implemented with awareness that all classes are likely to have these students in the room. Include gender-neutral terms such as they, them, and partner whenever possible, and integrate a trauma-informed approach to ensure the safety and well-being of students who have experienced relationship-based violence or sexual violence. We must acknowledge the clear limitations and harm caused by the current CPR program, and the Vigo County School Corporation must explore non-biased sex education options which affirm the lived experiences of our students and better prepare them as they navigate intimate relationships. Thank you.
Hi, so I don't have a prepared speech, but I do have some points that I want to go over. Most of what I was going to say has already been went over, a million times tonight, but I'm 34, I'm a graduate of Terre Haute South. I have 2 children myself who go to Sarah Scott who have just received sex education. And I'm pretty mortified, I'm appalled at hearing what they've been learning. They couldn't really even tell me what they were learning. But I remember when I was in school, and I was probably about 14, I think, and everybody else has their stories. I think mine was a scarf that they passed around, and they talked about how worn and used up the scarf got. And coming from a Christian background, I was already getting these type of messages from my family, from my church. And it just reinforces that shame. And as has already been said, having a religious-based curriculum is biased. I'm not understanding how we're allowed to have such a biased curriculum in place in the first place. There's a lot of information that I had to unlearn as I was becoming an adult. I've made it my responsibility to teach my children because I know they're not going to get the information that they need. We're separating boys and girls. We are not learning about consent. We're not learning about those interpersonal relationships, and sex is an interpersonal act. And yet, people don't even know how to communicate. Adults don't even still know how to communicate with each other when it comes to having honest discussions about sex, about what they're not okay with, about what they want. And our children aren't learning this. People don't feel comfortable talking openly because even from a young age, they're being taught that we need to be separate. This is something that, is taboo, it's dirty, and we're leaving them vulnerable to misinformation. They're going to go to the internet. They're going to go to their peers. I went to my peers. I got a lot of really bad information from them. And there's all sorts of things out there from the internet. We don't want them getting it from untrusted sources. We want them to get it from people who they've built a rapport with, people they can trust. And they deserve better. They need better. And I needed better, frankly.
Next is Nyla Bartoloma.
graduated from Terre Haute South. I want to start with Maslow's hierarchy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's this little pyramid of needs, and the bottoms is physiological needs, right? And we all know that reproduction is down there with one of the first necessary things for a human. It's up there with like air, water, food, shelter, sex, right? I think that teaching developing minds that sex is something to be ashamed of, or that you're dirty if you do it, knowing that they're going to have those urges come up from about the time they're 13 onward, sometimes earlier, is very damaging. I don't have studies or information that reflects that, but like many people have said, you can do a simple Google search and you'll find it. I think that our youth need to be educated with factual information about their bodies, their anatomy, how their development is going to progress, what sorts of things they can expect to feel, and how to interpret those feelings in a way that's healthy for them, how to protect themselves if they do decide to have sex. Abstinence is can be effective, but I know in my experience when I was in high school, it wasn't really the norm. Abstinence wasn't really the norm, and I know that feeling ashamed of doing something that is natural is not really good for a healthy development. You know, a lot of your neural synapses are formed when you're young and developing, and it can set you up for a lifetime of therapy and needing a lot of interventions that if you have learned, you know, at a young age that what you're experiencing is not only normal but a shared experience, and how to, you know, traverse that path in a safe way, I think it can prevent a lot of harm. I'll just say that. And I agree with most speakers tonight.
Thank you.
Leanne Downey. Down. Okay. Moving on to the next speaker, Jill Marlin.
VCSC board, thank you so much for hearing our concerns this evening. The first thing I'd like to say is I want to publicly acknowledge the two survivors who spoke with us this evening. Thank you for sharing with us tonight, and to all the other unspoken survivors, I and we believe you. Thank you. Hello, my name is Jill Garland, and I'm a parent of 2 children at VCSC. One has graduated, and one is currently enrolled. I've also worked in social services in various capacities for the past 10 years. There has been extensive talk this week and last about evidence-based curriculum, and I believe there needs to be some clarification. Essentially, what the comprehensive sex education advocates and proponents are arguing is that compared to abstinence-only programs, CSE programs have better outcomes for students. They have lower pregnancy rates, lower abortion rates, and lower rates of suicides for the LGBTQ students. And I have here, didn't pass them out, but they're here, several evidence-based studies to support these claims. This week, some highly disturbing claims came from the directors and teachers of the CPR program this week. They ran off graphic descriptions of supposed real CSE curriculum from real schools that are taking over and infiltrating young minds. They provided statistics and studies to prove these claims, except their information came literally word for word from the website stopcsc.com. It's a website created by Family Watch International and the American College of Pediatricians, both federally registered and identified as hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center due to racist and homophobic ideology. In other words, they were fake, fabricated news sources intended to antagonize. Now, the fact that the directors in education in charge of this curriculum of a program either lack critical thinking skills to evaluate what constitutes evidence-based materials, or they possibly have some biases. My final concern was that a CPR educator insisted that their credentials were legitimate because they had hundreds of hours of training. So these instructors spend 200 hours memorizing their own curriculum. Great, fine. But then they come in and pinky swear that they're definitely not racist or homophobic or biased in any way. Well, you could spend 200,000 hours memorizing curriculum, but as a parent, I want a licensed professional who is bound by a code of ethics to uphold a standard that I know that they will not infringe on my child's human right to exist. A pinky swear does not work for me as a parent. There are hundreds of curriculums available. Let's find one that brings Vigo County into the 21st century using evidence-based best practice for affirming inclusive, trauma-informed education.
Our next 2 speakers we have listed together, they're each going to be afforded 3 minutes. Kinsetta, Apollo, and Carrie Youssef.
Hello, my name is Kinsetta DePaulo, and I have two children in the Vigo County school system, a senior and a 6th grader. I'm reading the statement that was written by Carrie Youssef, who was not comfortable coming to an in-person meeting during COVID-19. These are Carrie's words, but I would like to emphasize that I also am behind them wholeheartedly. Dear Vigo County School Board and School Corporation members, I am writing as a parent of 2 children under the age of 10 years old and as a resident of Vigo County 47807. I support the request for sexual education curriculum that is medically accurate, up-to-date, age-appropriate, and inclusive of all students. Most importantly, I fully endorse the request that an outside review by qualified experts be conducted of the current sexual education curriculum to assess the curriculum and the needs of Vigo County students. Education practices, regardless of discipline, call for regular assessment of curriculum, and the sexual education curriculum should be treated as all other curriculum with clear review, assessment, and open evaluation. And Carrie writes, I appreciate your consideration of this statement.
Next speaker is William Edwards. He's here. Okay. All right. We'll move to Hannah Shepherd.
I'm not Hannah.
I was going to say, I'm going to let Eleni Brewer speak during this 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. I'm a mother and a foster mother of 11 kids that have graduated from Vigo County School Corporation and currently have 7 kids enrolled with Vigo County School Corporation. I have currently seen the program firsthand, being part of an EA system through our corporation and seen everything that everyone has stated has happened. I've been appalled by it. I have questioned it myself, but we are always shut down by our top administrators that this is a program that you guys have chosen. This has been taught since 2004. The current sexual education program does not reach every child in sexuality. It also focuses more on women than men. It does the fear of the STD and shaming. Every child should be considered when teaching about abstinence and safe sex. Younger children, which has not been mentioned a lot tonight, needs to be taught what a good touch, bad touch is. Most of our kids don't get that till they're in middle school. As well as about their bodies and the upper elementary kids. Abstinence should always be taught first, I do agree with that, but along with that, how safe sex, if chosen not to wait till marriage, is not shameful, but okay. Everyone, and I mean everyone, needs to have the right to learn about the safe, including our LGBT+, as well as our heterosexual child. Changes need to happen, and our world has changed since 2004, but this current thing is from 2004. My son Raleigh will now speak of what his experience is.
Hello, my name is Raleigh Shepherd. I'm 14 going to my freshman year and I am gay. I was taught many things that don't relate to me. I'm taught that the only way my love is valid is if I marry a woman. I was taught by the program that a perfect life is to marry a woman and have children and live the dream. I never heard about how my sexuality works. I was never taught by the system that my love life is okay. I was forced to believe to wait till marriage when I couldn't get married till 5 years ago. 5 years. I can count that on one hand. I'll give the school system credit. I learned one thing, the AIDS virus. My whole entire sexuality whittled down to a virus. All I'm asking for is to teach me and other kids that being gay is okay. Because homophobia is taught, not natural. Thank you. Next,
Hi, my name is Eleni Brewer. I am a former student of the Vigo County School Corporation. I now attend Indiana State. I did write a little speech, but a lot of people have already said what I said on the paper. I just kind of wanted to give my own personal view. When I was in middle school, I did do the CPR program, and because of that program, I ended up losing my best friend because she chose to, she did choose to have sex, and because of what was taught to me, it was frowned upon basically. And also because of that, I didn't even come out until I was in college because I felt that was the only comfortable place for me to come out. And because I knew in college that they teach about sexual orientation and loving other people besides just male and female. So I feel like if it's taught at a younger age, a lot of kids will feel a lot more comfortable coming out and having the vocabulary to come out at such a young age. I knew I loved other women when I was, or liked other women when I was very young, but I didn't know how to express myself, especially in school. So, I feel like if that's changed, then it could just help the youth.
Thank you.
Tiffany with, but I'm going to have Morgan speak for you. Okay.
Hi, I'm Morgan Strom, and I've been so blessed that so many people have echoed my own thoughts and feelings here today, that the school corporation has really let down the children that it's supposed to be supporting and setting up for success. I would just like to just echo everyone before me that I would love to see a more inclusive move forward to include LGBT in our school and our curriculum, and to kind of cut ties with the CPC. I think they're a very dangerous organization, and I do not support them or what they stand for. Anything you want to say?
I also just wanted to continue on the fact that like they're grooming, like the grooming situation. I know way too many girls that when they were 13-year-old talking to a 24-year-old, that is not appropriate. And like they had this idea that it was okay because they were they were seen as more mature by this man. This man said, "You're more mature for your age, so it's okay." No, we should really let these kids know that it's not love. There's a reason why the people their age aren't like, you know what I mean, talking to them. Like there's something wrong with these people if they keep coming to children and pursuing a child. Like it's just weird to me, but I just want to keep going on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Again, just so everybody knows, I've got 7:54. We'll stop at 8 o'clock, and that clock in the back is off. So I just want to point that out to everyone.
Next speaker is Tim Hawkins.
Okay, well, I had two statements that I was here to read on behalf of community members who could not come tonight, but I guess I will limit that to one.
You could read 3 for one and 3 for the other.
I will read one, and then if you were not on the list but need to follow me immediately, then make sure you can speak. Okay?
No, I mean, it's not even about you. I feel like everyone should be able to speak. There shouldn't be a time limit on the general public conference.
Yeah, we're going to finish this at 8 o'clock.
We did that last night as well.
And on the first night, so. Do you want to begin, sir?
Okay. Speaking on behalf of Shay Phillips, I am writing to you today as a concerned Terre Haute resident and youth development professional with over 15 years of experience working in education and youth programming, and master's degree in educational psychology and youth development. These comments are my own and do not reflect anything about the stance of my employer. I am profoundly concerned about the impact that the current CPR curriculum has on Vigo County students. While waiting to have sex until marriage is an entirely valid choice, the reality is that many students are engaging in sexual activity now. You are leaving them without the information and tools to make informed, healthy choices. Even if students are waiting until marriage to have sex, they will also need this information to make healthy choices. Furthermore, research shows that sex education programs that provide up-to-date and medically accurate information without shaming students for engaging in sexual activity are the ones that actually support young people in delaying sex, while also reducing adolescent pregnancy and STIs. While it might not be mandated by Indiana law to be inclusive of LGBTQ+ people and people with disabilities, the reality is that you have LGBTQ+ students and students with disabilities in your district. Additionally, you have students who are going to engage in sexual activity and or relationships with LGBTQ+ people and people with disabilities. They too deserve sex education that addresses their experiences, needs, and concerns. No matter what is taught in school, Vigo County students are learning about sex and relationships. Providing up-to-date, medically accurate, inclusive sex education in schools is an opportunity to make sure students are learning the best information to make healthy and affirmative decisions about sex, their bodies, and their relationships. Sincerely, Shay Phillips. The other statement that I was going to read is on behalf of Dr. Lane Mathers, whose comments are essentially the same.
Thank you.
Next, we have Brittany Hall.
Hi, my name's Brittany Hall, and I grew up majority of my time in Terre Haute, went to the school system in Vigo County, so I am familiar with the CPR and sex ed curriculum. But my main point that I wanted to make here tonight is I ask all of you guys to go home and think about what the motivation is behind keeping LGBTQI education out of the sex ed curriculum. What is the motivation behind that? Because what it seems to be, and what has been echoed here tonight, is that it is a religious-based ideology that keeps us there. And I think it's important to recognize that as a diverse community, there are people who do not share the same religious ideas, beliefs, and who do not identify as the community members who were here last night, speaking on behalf of congregations and churches and things of that nature, because we've seen the posts. We've seen the information that's being circulated out there. We've seen the fear-mongering that's being done about what comprehensive sex education might look like. It's not appropriate, it's not factual. I think what all of us here tonight want, what we need, is something that is medically accurate, is inclusive to all persons, regardless of a religious, background, regardless, as somebody else mentioned, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of race, regardless of disability, identity, all of those things. We all deserve unbiased information so that we can make our own choices, so that we are understanding our own bodily autonomy. The morals and all of that, the beliefs, all of that can be done in the home. As educators, it is your job to provide us with all of the facts, all of the information that we need and that we will need as adults, because the education that I got and so many others have gotten is not, it's unrealistic going into the world as an adult. It's not appropriate to shame people for making the decision to have sex requested, who've been put in positions to educate and inform, are doing that on a biased basis. They're taking their personal beliefs and convictions and using that to perpetuate standards that are unrealistic. That's all I have to say. I think everybody here tonight has pretty much touched on every other point I was gonna make, but thank you guys for taking the time to listen.
Thank you. That finishes our session.